And you're live now, you're right.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Positivity Project. Oh, let's try that one more time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Positivity Project, brought to you by AchieveWellnessTogether.com and SacredU.love. I am your host, Angela Nelson, and today we are celebrating Anti-Boredom Month, a time dedicated to finding new and exciting ways to engage our minds and enrich our lives. And I believe this was formed out of a need to get teenagers, especially if they're in between, school and work and there's nothing to do, and they say, "Oh my gosh, there's nothing to do. I'm so bored." And so this is a way to encourage them and everybody to break free from the monotony and discover activities that bring you joy and excitement. Is the perfect opportunity to try new hobbies, learn new skills, and find creative ways to stay mentally and physically active. To kick things off with some positivity, let's share a heartwarming story. A man struggling with severe depression found purpose by picking up litter. He, along with his family and strangers, cleared 13 tons of trash from their community. This act of kindness not only helped the environment, but also brought a sense of connection and community. It is a beautiful reminder of how positive actions can make a significant difference. You can read more about this inspiring story on swns.com. In line with today's theme, I am thrilled to introduce my friend David Lederman, an international speaker, author, and executive coach. David combines neuroscience and psychology with ancient wisdom to help high achievers transform their demanding, volatile workdays into something deeply fulfilling. He is passionate about helping people better navigate the crazy contradictions and the wisdoms of our day by aligning with their unique zone of fulfillment. David, it is wonderful to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Well, David, let's start off by looking at your journey. What inspired you to combine neuroscience and psychology with ancient wisdom when it comes to your coaching?
That's a great question. I don't know if it was any one thing. I've always been the type that, I mean, from as far back as I can remember, I always just looked for the connections and things. So when people drew a line and said, this is this and this is that, I was always like, I don't know, there's just something that feels like they're connected underneath. Um, so that aspect, that quality was always there. I spent 20 years working in the tech field, primarily focused on user experience, but I was intrigued by programming and the analytical side of things along with the creative. So there was always this desire just to have the best of both worlds there. And in 2015, after seeing so many really smart people, not just burning out, but sort of spiritually tuning out in their jobs, and even just a day-to-day dynamic that just didn't add up. I like to call it a day-to-day where we're full of fear, stress, and strain, along with confusion and contradiction, which we're not often aware of, but it's there. We end up trying to do these things that, all these different sound bites, all these different best practices. We try to apply it all, and it ends up being this just really gut-wrenching, unpleasant experience. And that led me to hit a real low point. I don't want to just say burnout. I mean, just rock bottom kind of experience. And my daughter is much older now, but at the time she was 1.5, and I was just like, I've got to figure my way through this. I have to make sense of this. And I just had this visceral sense that I'm going to have to explore and challenge every one of my perspectives, because until that point, I was very successful. And I don't mean in the material sense of the way, oh, I have this huge resume. I mean, I had great things on my resume and I had a lot of amazing experiences, but it was like life made sense. I set out to do this And either I did or didn't in a way that seemed logical. But once my daughter showed up and we went through a lot of pregnancy challenges to bring her into the world, when all of that kind of came together, it just life came to be where no matter what I did, no matter how much I applied these practices and these skills that had led me to great success, I always came up short. And at that point, I was just like, man, every example out there, and I'll never forget the moment where I was at my lowest point when I finally just threw in the towel in a way. I was like, every example out there is asking me to use energy I don't have with time that doesn't exist to try to foster some new habit to be somebody I'm not in order to get results that I need now. And I was like, the math of that doesn't add up. And so that led me to just say, not starting over, but I'm going to question everything, look at everything. And so my family's mostly in the medical profession. So the science, the psychology, I had a background from college. The neuroscience, I've always just been fascinated by the brain and how it works. And all of that led from one thing to another and many, many steps, eventually getting to a point where I was like, life in a way was moving me to explore these other areas of wisdom. I'm very big into nature connection. That got me interested in Native American cultural practices. And eventually that led to exploring even a form of shamanism that is originated in South America and Peru. And as I did that bit by bit, I just applied that skill and style that I have of going, wait, these do fit together in an interesting way. And when that happens, the actual experience of applying these seemingly contradictory truths suddenly makes sense. So that's kind of how it happened.
What a beautiful journey, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I love that you chose to, well, first you acknowledged that, hey, these don't add up. Like you said, the math wasn't adding up, all of the teachings, all of the everything that we're supposed to do, and you allowed yourself the space to question and question everything. And I love that. I think as adults, and you and I have talked about this before, I think as adults, we forget that, hey, we're allowed to ask questions. You know, as a kid, you're always why? And so I think that that's a beautiful childlike spark that we need to hold on to, because if we don't ask questions, how do we find where, we want to, I don't want to say fit in, but where our path leads? How do we know? And make it feel good for us. Like you said, you had to feel good for you. So I commend you for that. I think that's beautiful. And I know you mentioned integrating Native American practices and also mentioned Peru. And I know that you just returned from a trip from Peru. And I understand it was an enlightening experience. Would you like to expand upon that for us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was amazing in all the ways you would expect. Do you know what I mean? We did the touristy like Machu Picchu stuff, and I remember being a little dink, probably 4 years old, seeing a picture of Machu Picchu and just feeling I'm going to go there someday. I just something about it just drew me in. So my expectations were through the roof, and it exceeded them. And it wasn't even the site itself; it was the mountains around it. Just had this majestic, massive but comforting presence that is just so hard to put into words. You just have to kind of feel it and be there and experience it for yourself. And I'm pretty dense I mean, over the years, especially as I've explored these different bodies of wisdom, I've gotten much more reconnected to my sort of intuitive right brain side. But I always joke, if I can sense the energy of a place, then you know it's strong, because that's how dense I can be when it comes to that. And it was really, really amazing. The people there are so connected to the land for the most part. Um, and, the history, the food, everything about it was really, really incredible and eye-opening. We were there for almost 3 weeks, and I normally do fine when it comes to altitude. I've gone skiing and spent a lot of time in the high elevations of Colorado, um, and for whatever reason, even in Costco or in Cusco, excuse me, I was going to say Costco. That's weird. Um, in Cusco,
Everywhere.
yeah, exactly. That was 11,000-ish feet, and I was fine.
Yeah.
But then we went to Lake Titicaca and just another 1,500 feet. And the 4 days we were there, I never felt so bad in my entire life. I mean, first of all, I couldn't sleep, so I didn't know that there was this altitude kind of induced sort of insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
And my God, I have a whole new respect for that. And people just looked at me and said, like, you look bad. Because it's one of those things where even the feeling of knowing that you are working so hard to get air and being so tired, and I would close my eyes, and as soon as I would feel my eyes closing, I'd gasp, feeling like I'm going to suffocate. It was
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to put those feelings into word, but all of that was going on. The hotel we stayed in happened to, I mean, it was supposed to be this amazing hotel. It was in a lot of ways, but for whatever reason, fate would have it that it had power issues. So we had no running water for the entire first day and throughout the rest of our trip there, power as well. And so on all these levels, it just felt like a war zone that I was going through. And then once we got out of there, um, it was something where I was just starting to feel better, and my daughter got a really bad bug, stomach bug. And so
Oh
she
no.
was really, really sick. And so the 2 days we were in Lima, we ended up, actually, the day we were going to fly out, having to go to the emergency room. And then when we got to the airport, they ended up not having, the lights weren't working. So none of the planes were taken. So it was just this one thing after another when we were at a point where it's like physically, emotionally, spiritually, like we're spent, we're done. And for me and my wife, it's like when you bring our daughter's well-being into it, all of a sudden it's like we can like for us being sick and all that, it's one thing. When you see your child looking basically like she's barely holding on just because she's literally can't hold anything down, not even water, um,
Mm.
it's it rattles you to the core. All of that kind of came together. We eventually made it out, and that's what it felt like. It felt like, okay, the most amazing trip, and then wanting nothing to do with Peru, which is an unfair kind of um, relationship to kind of put on all that experience. But at that point, it was just like we just want to be done with this trip, and it felt like an entire lifetime between the two. And then what followed over the next couple of days was a huge breakthrough in terms of some stuff I've been working on, that was really, really powerful, and that served all of it ended up serving a purpose. But man, it was gut wrenching in a lot of ways, as awe-inspiring as it was.
Wow. And I've been to Peru, so I know about the comfort challenges. And, you don't always have internet or access to running water and internet cafes, if you can find them. And then, there's all these different barriers. So I understand it sounds like though with the health crises, that just compounded, and especially the altitude, of Lake Titicaca, and which I've been there and it's beautiful and amazing. However, I do know that altitude sickness is a real thing. We even dealt with that on ski patrol when I was at nowhere near that altitude, and
Mhm.
people would have that came from like Florida and places like that. So it's a very real thing and can completely, make you want to just get out. And when you were saying, you and your wife can handle it, but when it comes to your child, that's a whole different level. And you just wanted to change where you were. And that brings me back to how you help people, you know, break through their suffocating, limiting beliefs to find their authentic selves. And I think there's a good parallel parallel there between, the experience that you had and, thinking about how your clients, they probably do feel like they're suffocating. Like you said earlier, things aren't adding up. And, I have all these answers, but they're not the answer. It's not my path. So, how do you help individuals break free from their limiting beliefs, if you will, and step into their authenticity?
Well, the first thing, there's a lot of stuff out there on limiting beliefs. There's a lot of stuff out there on, embracing your authenticity and going after and living your best self. So I always like to acknowledge, and this just comes from my years of user experience work, we have to acknowledge where people are at. And I don't believe that it's as simple as, okay, just identify your limiting belief and go run and make your dreams happen, because that's why I focus on fulfillment. We can 10x performance, we can master work-life balance, we can, become full of purpose. And I've worked with all kinds of people who still burn out or feel incredibly unfulfilled in each of those
Mhm.
areas, right? In terms of, checking those boxes. And that's not to discount the truth and value of all the stuff that's out there on things like limiting beliefs and so forth. But to me, it's really about understanding that oftentimes when it comes to our life and this notion of fulfillment, we think of fulfillment as this thing that happens in response to. So I do this, I go here, and then I will feel fulfilled, get fulfilled, and so forth. The indigenous cultures that I've been versed in, and the ancient wisdom that I've been versed in, um, has a very different approach to life in a way. And everything about them is this notion that's called a couple different things depending on the particular body of wisdom. But I like to sum it up as this term right relationship. And right relationship is, again, because we're so transactionally focused, so outcome focused, so output focused with our Western conditioning, what ends up happening is everything we hear as, okay, this is something in order to. But when you understand that what right relationship is really all about, it's about this moment and the next moment. It's about doing something that is active, taking a step that is fostering as much harmony as possible for you, for who you're becoming, and for all the stuff that's unfolding around you. And so what I found was I really felt that what's lacking out there is a kind of framework or perspective that allows you, the Western brain, to really engage some of these deeper truths that conflict with one another in a way that doesn't cause it to sort of just blow up and go, I don't get it, and I'm just going to do this sort of knee-jerk kind of reaction thing. And a part of that came just because of my own way. Like that's what I did, for so long. And I'm like, that's not working. And so I really, you mentioned zone of fulfillment when you were introducing me. I really have seen, and again, this all shows up from these ancient cultures, that we each show up with this unique space in which to be in right or relationship. And you can think of it as, or I like to describe it as having sort of three spheres. There's a sphere that is being in right or relationship with that which you are already, which is made up of your thoughts and feelings in this moment, positive or not, right? Like me in Peru, there was a lot of not positive thoughts that I had to acknowledge and honor. They were there for a reason. That doesn't mean dwelling on it, right? Um, but it's honoring that because it's serving a purpose in that moment, even if it's to tell me I need to make a shift, right? Um, there's also all kinds of conditioning, trauma. If you at all are familiar with the field of epigenetic inheritance, like we literally inherit lenses and limiting beliefs and all kinds of aspects of our psyche that actually aren't ours, if you think of ours as our lifetime, right? All that's going on that I sum up is that's in that sphere that we need to recognize and be in right relationship with. And most of us aren't comfortable doing so or have been conditioned not to. Or we're in such a rush to make our life better that we overlook that and go right to, let me just run and go after my dream and being super positive. That's where the toxic positivity can come in versus the authentic positivity, which is a very different thing. So there's that sphere. Then there's the other sphere. And again, with the Venn diagram, they're all uh, present at once. There's the fact that ancient cultures taught that we all showed up with what I find is best described as a medicine, an innate way of seeing, feeling, thinking, and engaging the world around us. Not as in, okay, I'm here to be a lawyer, basketball player, or whatever else, but innate ways that are so you that the moment you are embodying that, whether you're working, playing, doing chores, or whatever, you can't help but light up, right? Because it's you. And it's what you're here to do, just as the sun is here to light up being the sun. Okay. The problem is most of us have no idea what our medicine is. And we've also learned to be very successful being versions of ourselves that are in complete contradiction to that. So it very much ruffles our feathers to actually be in alignment in that direction. So you have a lot of people I call it the Tom Brady effect. I'm a big football player. I actually respect Tom Brady tremendously, but I was shocked when I remember somebody asking him in an interview after he won like 5 or 6, Super Bowls, what was your favorite, most fulfilling Super Bowl? And he said the next one. I remember going like, wow, you can't
Hmm.
even say which one brought you joy because I need that next thing, right? That's not criticizing because again, it's amazing what he did. But the problem is if you're achieving success, so to speak, in that direction, you're never going to be fulfilled. And the ripple effects of that, the unintended consequences of that for you and everyone around you are going to be really sobering. And then the third part of that sphere is being in right relationship with that which is unfolding around you. There's a lot of wisdom out there, modern and ancient, everything from quantum physics to shamanism that's 12,000 years old. It says everything's a mirror. And so what's happening around us is a mirror. And that can be very sobering. And Peru was a mirror for me. And it was incredibly frustrating to have to look myself in the mirror there. There's a lot to unpack with that. I'm not going to get into that, but just suffice it to say that why I love and the notion of right relationship and why this zone of fulfillment was so powerful and transformative for my life and my clients' lives is because it immediately takes you out of, in order for me to make my life better, to be more positive, to whatever it is, I need this and this and this to happen. And then it's about something
Yes.
that allows you to embrace everything, the whole you now, the whole you that's becoming, and these forces that are very, very, what's the word? That go well beyond just our logical understanding of who and what we are in a way that still plays nicely with the way our analytical, logic oriented brains want. And so what that helps people do is realize if fulfillment is not the payoff, it's the process, it's the path. And so we need to shift, have a paradigm shift around this notion of, wait a second, being fulfilled is not a luxury. It's the way we're actually designed and wired to be, but how we understand fulfillment is very, very different. And so that's something that is in some ways really empowering because suddenly people can go, oh, I don't have to resist and fight life and what's happening right now. And there's a lot of energy in all the crap and all the frustration, excuse my French, and all the stuff that we can't stand, but that is life force. And I get chills as I
Mm.
say it because I'm
Yes.
remembering how how much I just wanted to get out of that hotel in Peru because it was so hard for me, somebody who's physically always, my body and I have been like this. It's like there's never been a question. So it was very humbling to go through that.
Mm.
Um, and yet, lo and behold, a huge breakthrough came later. And so I tell people the path of fulfillment is not easy, but it does foster ease. Joy is not always pleasant. It really isn't. Um, but it's this thing that when you're in it, and it's something that
Mhm.
makes life a heck of a lot more, what's the word? Um, just enriched, the best way I can put it.
There's so many things that I would love to unpack there. And I want to go back to like the Tom Brady story for a moment. And I myself have been guilty. Well, I don't want to say guilty. I have done this before where, oh, I'll be, well, also you mentioned, I'll be happy when this, and this fall into place. Well, who's to say this will actually fall into place? And who am I to say this is the place they should be in? And we're constantly, hitting ourselves, running into the wall and wondering why it's such a struggle. People talk about hustling, and you're always hustling and you're always struggling and, the fight to, find your power, find your way. And it's like our power is always with us, always with us. That's one thing that I've changed in my vocabulary is, maybe the building was without electricity, but I always have power, always have the power. A friend of mine reminded me today of words are very powerful, so choose them wisely. And the Tom Brady story saying that the next one is his favorite football game. The next one. And a lot of high achieving people are always chasing that next thing with the illusion of fulfillment. Like you said, that we've been programmed to this is fulfillment, this is success, this is where you're supposed to be, X marks the spot, but it's always out of our reach. If you have that ideal fulfillment over here, and okay, here I come, I'm getting closer. Well, guess what? It's going to keep moving, just like Tom Brady's football game, because you're never there. You're always chasing. And that is unfortunately the studies behind why there's a lot of teen suicide is usually the high achieving teenagers that are, hey, how did this happen? It came out of left field. We don't understand. We can't wrap our heads around it. It's because they didn't understand the process. They did not allow themselves to be joyful in the moment and on the journey. They kept chasing that and realized it's unobtainable. That's it. And so that's why they made the choice that they did. And that's my understanding of it. And it's just we really need to look at the word fulfillment and identifying or redefining that word. And I love that you said, it's about the process. It's not always easy. It's not meant to be easy. There will be times of ease, there will be times of discomfort, and it's all about embracing the flow.
Well, I think that's a easy, and I used to say that a lot, and I do still. But I have to recognize that embracing the flow to a Western mind, to most people in the modern world, where you are conditioned to be somebody you're not, where you're disconnected
Mm,
oftentimes from your body, your emotions, and your intuition, and so forth. When all that's happening around is greater or ever increasing amounts of volatility, complexity, uncertainty, and chaos, it's like just flow. What the heck does that like? What does that actually mean? It's actually really frustrating, right? And that's why I come back to this notion that there is a part of us that's here to be, like the Eckhart Tolle says, and there's a part of us that's simultaneously becoming, which is like the Tony Robbins, like go out, become that, there's more, you have more potential in you. And they're both there just and at the same time. And that's really hard for our grown-up, adult, conditioned mind to understand. And yet, I tell people you can do that because you look at a baby and a baby you look at and you go, wow, that is the most amazing, beautiful child. Like their eyes connect with yours and you're just in that moment and you're in awe with just this life force that's right there as is. And you're totally present to and appreciating everything that it is in that moment. And yet you are fully understanding, even if it's not fully conscious and front and center of your mind, that that child is literally undergoing massive change in the moment and becoming something that's going to make it literally look very, very different in just a few weeks, right? So we can hold that, we can understand that, we can embrace that. It's just when we comes to our own lives and how we navigate and how we see things and define things and what we've been conditioned to do, we again, I come back to the user experience of actually day to day and how that looks is really messed up. And not because of any one thing or any one person or perspective being wrong. It's just they all don't play nicely with the with half the story, which is either oftentimes what you find is people who are very much focused on the science and the modern or the intuitive ancient. And to me, it's like
mm,
when you marry both, there's a framework I use, or my framework is based off of a framework that's 5,000 years old from these Quero shaman in Peru that I'll never forget. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, because I did not understand how did life lead me to sitting in a class about shamanism? So much so that literally I'll never forget, there's a circle of 40 people and I'm looking around at each person and I'm just projecting my own discomfort. I'm like, that's a crazy person. That's a whack job. That's a sketchy and I'm just going around one after the other going like just insane. And I'm like, what am I doing? Because I was so uncomfortable. And yet there was a part of me that's like, you need to be here. And it
mhm,
wasn't until getting a little deeper into it, I realized I'm not here to necessarily be a shaman, though I do love the practices of it. It's that it's a whole different lens of holding space, if you will, and navigating life day to day and bigger picture. And I say all that because when you begin to appreciate that, it helps us understand why the dynamics have been so frustrating and confusing. And there's one other thing I really just want to quickly throw in because I don't want to forget it because it's so important to voice because it doesn't get voiced a lot. You mentioned the teen suicide uh, thing. One of the things that happens is in the teenage years, our medicine starts to emerge. There's a book I'm actually going through right now. It's called The Thundering Years. It's really, really powerful book that talks about this again from an integrated kind of perspective, but very much grounded in these indigenous ancient wisdoms. And it's something where most of us, when we were teenagers, were already on the path to thinking of ourselves as just our career and being a version only embodying certain characteristics that led to more acceptance, love, just attention from our parents and the people around us. That's not to blame our parents or anything like that. And oftentimes they wanted what was best for us, right? But the end result
Mhm.
of that was a user experience in which, excuse me, we're very, we're very much not ourselves. And and yet we're told to be our authentic selves. And for a teenager, they're literally going through so much change, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. And that's where having practices, having an understanding that not only is fulfillment this thing that is not your job and it's not the things that are going to be on your resume, but having stories, ancient stories, and other kinds of legends and myths and things that help people understand in a way um, they're meant to go through a figurative kind of death and rebirth into embodying this thing that's emerging from them. And a mentor of mine said it best when, as a grown up, he helped me connect to my original medicine. And I'm like, yes, finally, I got it. Because I'm thinking, like, okay, I got the thing. Now I'm good, right? Typical, like left brain kind of Western approach to it. And he goes, no, 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 Dave, now's the hard part. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I spent decades without this. Now you give it to me. He's like, no, I just gave you a lightsaber because we're both Star Wars geeks. And he's like, you have to build relationship to it. Again, it comes back to this
Mhm.
notion of right relationship. And he goes, that lightsaber is really powerful. And you're probably going to sadly cut off a lot of things you don't want to cut off in the process of building a relationship to it. Fortunately, I had good mentors to help me do that. But imagine that energy going through you and having nobody and no awareness of it. It's just like, it's, you want to kill yourself in a way, sadly, but it's like, because it's like that energy has to come out
Yes.
somewhere, right? So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because it's something that it really makes it tugs on my heart to see that energy that's this incredibly powerful but beautiful energy wanting to emerge and not having the surface area and the means and a lot of people wanting what's best for those teenagers and it's just getting messed, things bumping into each other. So anyway, I know we went off the path, but it's just something that I feel strongly about.
I appreciate you sharing that. And we're never off the path. Everything I believe is meant to be as it is. So I thank you for that because I agree with you fully. I look at that and that power emerging is beautiful. And, like you said, to recap, people are always wanting the best for you. Well, usually, hopefully, wanting the
Yeah,
best for you,
hopefully.
but then
Yeah.
their direction or guidance doesn't really bring answers or allow for authenticity or exploration or curiosity. And I think that that goes back to questioning, if we
Mhm.
allow ourselves and our loved ones to question everything, it's fun. It's actually fun. And it may not always lead, to a joyful discovery, if you will. However, it could be a painful growth, or like you said, the lightsaber, you may cut off a part that you don't mean to. It's all part of the experience. And I love that, when you say the right relationship, having that duality or even, together, all of that beautifully entangled together. And when you find that synergy of just embracing it in its entirety, I think that's part of, and being in the present, no matter where you are on that. I think that's part of the fulfillment, as right side brain would think in Western. That's a way to kind of bridge it, I believe.
Yeah, there's a what and a how. And if you're focused on just one and not the other, you're going to run into
Yeah.
trouble, especially when it comes to fulfillment. And I mean, it's a much longer conversation, and that's where, uh, for me, it took years of synthesizing all this wisdom, my own experiences, working with people and stuff, to really hone it and get it down to something concrete, because there are actual mechanics to fulfillment that are important to understand, because um, especially when we take into account everything we've heard about work-life balance. I tell people I am all
Mm,
for balance. I'm not okay with work-life balance, because it constantly keeps you in this state where it's like, okay, I'm going to focus on this sphere, but not this sphere. And I'm going to focus on this
hmm
sphere, but not this sphere. The question becomes, how in this moment, right here, right now, can I step in a way that's most harmonious? And the thing is that oftentimes that involves taking an action and listening to our body in a way where, like, I don't even know how this connects to these four things in my life that don't, that are, on fire or full of alarm or whatever else. But beginning to experiment with that and see that actually it is connected, first of all, in ways you can't possibly comprehend, and you don't have to. And when you begin to understand that, it's like, wow, okay, I don't have to sit here and micromanage. Did I get X number of hours of this in and this in and this in? You just have to, it becomes a much more simple, organic process. That's actually, in my opinion, a lot more fun, because it's not so mechanical, and it's much more
hmm
responsive to what's going on around. So people have asked me, why is my website is called magicandawe.com? And I go, because when you begin to look at it and really say, okay, this isn't working, and I've got to use a different strategy and a different approach forward. Man, life just, you see, there's a lot of magic there. And I tell people that MA in magic literally means to transform uh, matter, to literally transform matter. So there's nothing more practical than magic, because that's what we're trying to do, right? And it's freaking full, like, we're life is full of awesome things, and we lose sight of that, partly because we're so busy trying to just stay afloat, right? And it's like, who has time for that? Because it's like, I'm trying to just do what this one book told me to do, when I'm squeezing that in to my day that's already
mm
insane,
Yes.
right? And I remember hearing, because I did 3 years of Kriya Yoga, and I heard somebody say that, and I'm a big fan of it, but somebody said, if you feel like 30 minutes of meditation takes too much out of your day, you should be meditating for an hour. And at first, I remember I was just like, I get it, but ultimately they're trying to get me to do something in a way that there's a smoother user experience. They're trying to get me to
hmm
release the things that are getting in the way of that, but without acknowledging that it's something that feels very, very challenging. It's almost like saying, I like to use the analogy, if you're holding on to a door and it's like, I gotta, I can't let go of this. And you're pulling and you're pulling, you're trying to do so. If you actually invert it and lean into the door, you can't not hold on to, I mean, you have to let go of it, mechanics of it, right? So there's things like that that can transform our experience in a way where suddenly it's like, oh, that's what they meant by this, And in some ways we have to figure it out for ourselves, but in some ways we can learn from the patterns, in our experiences, and say, might there be a little smoother process to this, and that's what I'm all about.
Yeah, might there be a smoother pattern? Yes. I was just laughing because I can look back on my life and say, yeah, there probably was, like, about every time, every single time. And yet I wouldn't be where I am now if it weren't for those
Yeah.
experiences, and it's all learning experiences. So you mentioned your website, magicandawe.com. So for
Mhm.
our listeners, David, who are interested in starting their journey with your programs, what would be the first step?
Just go to the website. There's a free resource on there. It's a guide to feeling fulfilled as a high achiever, right? And it's free PDF. It's got a lot of really helpful information in there, and talks very quickly. It gets into I'm all about practical, tangible things that you can do. And so there's a practice in there that's literally at the core of so much of what I do. So I'd recommend looking at that. And then hopefully you have some questions in response to that. And if so, just reach out to me on the contact form on the website, and I'd be happy to talk to people. But I really, um, Angela, what you said about questions, like I always tell people, I'm like, I would rather sit with a good question than a good answer. Because the question is what leads to more. It leads to a deeper relationship than just being told, okay, here's what it is. And so, whatever it is, whether you hear
Mhm.
this and say, okay, this is inspiring me to do whatever, let those questions guide you and let yourself come up with really good questions, hard questions for yourself and whoever it is that you are reaching out to.
Thank you for that. That is beautiful, and it comes back again to allow yourself to ask those questions and the hard questions, and that's how, growth occurs. And David, you have been an amazing guest, and I could talk with you for hours and hours. Thank you so very much for sharing your insights and your experiences with us today. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. And remember, breaking free from boredom and embracing positivity can transform your life. Be sure to check out David's website at magicandall.com. And we will see you next time on the Positivity Project. Thank you. And let's stop.